This question says we're working on completing rows of truth tables for conjunctions, disjunctions, conditional and biconditional statements. And so this is really building toward a much bigger, more complicated problem. We're just kind of looking at how we do one row. And so this first part, we're looking at this particular row right here. And what's important to understand is to fill this out, we're relying on the fact, and I've already copied this so I can have it handy, on the fact that we have these truth values for all these basic statements more or less memorized. So there's your conjunction, there's your disjunction, there's your conditional, and there's your biconditional. And so there's the truth values for all four of those statements. The negation is kind of the obvious one. It's just the opposite. And as you build these out of two statements, so if we just P and Q, as you do these problems, you hopefully get very good at understanding the starting pattern is T, T, F, F on this side and T, F, T, F. And the purpose of that is you're getting every possible combination of there's two T's, there's a T and an F where the T is on the P and the F is on the Q. There's another T and an F where the F is on the P and the T is on the Q, and there's a situation where they're both false. So that's sort of every conceivable scenario in terms of how P and Q could shake out in terms of their truth values, whether they're true or false. And so based on that, I'm going to scoot this back up just a little bit. So we're relying on our knowledge of those truth values. So here we're given the situation where A is true, B is true, and C is false. So what do we think about, or what do we do with the conjunction that's essentially saying C and A? That's that conjunction is the and scenario. So the way I remember that one is that they both have to be true in order for that conjunction to be true. Because if I look at this situation here, the only time this is true, the only time the conjunction is true is if both P and Q are true. So where I have C and A, I look and say, well, C is false, A is true, so then this is definitely false because they both weren't true. And then we look further, and we look at the conditional statement, B implies C, or if B then C, however you want to say that. And again, so now looking at the conditional, notice the only time it's false is if you start with true implies false, then you have a false statement. But false implies true is true, and false implies false is true. And in a verbal sense, a way to remember this one is if you are allowed to assume something false, then you can basically make any statement and say the overall statement is true. So that's what this is doing. So when you're arguing with someone, and we'll look at arguments later, but when you're arguing with someone, if they make a false supposition, a false assumption, then any wild thing could come out of that conversation based on a false assumption. And so when I look at this conditional, I've got to find B implies C, or if B then C. So I look back to the beginning. B is true, C is false. So that's the case where the first one is true, the second one is false. So the overall conditional is going to be false. And then the biconditional, the last biconditional here that we're looking at, is you're kind of putting those two statements together, C and A, if and only if B implies C. And so now we look at those pieces together. So really we're looking at false, if and only if false. So we're going over here to this line right here. So false if and only if false, that actually is true, because no matter which way you're starting in terms of the direction of the arrow, you're making a false assumption. So that overall statement is true. So that's how you work through one row, and eventually, and in fact in the next video, we're going to do an entire truth table. So we're actually doing multiple rows at a time, but just to focus on one row, that's how we make that. We build it in pieces and then look at the overall overall statement. I'll pause that video and then do the next one.